Hi everyone, it's Dr. Michele Ledger. I'm the GRNZ Welfare Manager, and I'm going to be talking to you about GRNZ's injury prevention strategy and some of the data that informed this strategy. So firstly, by way of background, I think it's obvious to everybody that the social license of greyhound racing has been under threat globally and has seen the shutdown of greyhound racing in most states in the USA, as well as in the ACT in Australia. And the social license to operate really talks about an acceptance of the community that an industry operates according to the regulatory requirements of that industry, but also the requirements of the community and according to their expectations. And I think it's fair to say that the community expectations of greyhound racing is one of a zero harm to the animals involved. And injuries remain an ongoing threat to our social license for that reason. Now, New Zealand has been under government review since the Robertson Review was released in July of 2021. And the government decision on the future of the greyhound racing industry is yet to be handed down. And injuries really remain one of GRNZ's primary focus in terms of its strategy. So when we think about reducing racing injuries, we really are talking about having a functioning racing safety system. And as you can see by the diagram, a racing safety system requires a shared responsibility. And it talks about primarily the health and welfare, obviously, of our greyhounds that are participating. It requires us to have good infrastructure and satisfactory tracks and facilities for those greyhounds to race at. It requires good policies and procedure for the welfare and integrity in order to regulate the industry efficiently, and really committed, informed, and qualified participants who are committed to racing safety in order to make this system work. And really this important concept of shared responsibility of everyone in order to address racing safety. And here, when we think about future-proofing our industry, we need to start thinking about sustainable racing and all the interdependencies of a sustainable racing structure, which ultimately provides the economic viability for the industry to continue. And here what's really important is not to underestimate the importance of greyhound welfare in this entire system, as well as really our committed and professional people. So racing safety really exists on a continuum from really poor to really good. And what we're striving for is that optimal place where everything works cohesively together to achieve those incremental improvements. And I think previously a lot of trial and error was a well-established method of really deciding where is that just right place, or the Goldilocks effect, as it's commonly known as. And really, rather, what we need is to be using really good data insights to drive our understanding of injury risk factors and all of the contributing factors to those in order to make better decisions to make those incremental improvements. So after reviewing many injuries and their contributing factors, we've distilled the three main categories which contribute to injuries down to these three, which are greyhound fitness, racing incidents, and track design and maintenance. And under each of these major categories are multiple factors, some of which can be measured and controlled. So starting with greyhound fitness, what does the data tell us about greyhound fitness? And the credit for some of this injury analysis here goes to the RIB data analyst, Mr. Colin Hodgson. So having a look at this heat map here, we see that a return to racing after a layoff or a spell of 21 days or more was really highly correlated with injuries, as well as the age of the greyhound at the time the injury occurred. And here we saw that greyhounds around 40 months and above have a much higher injury rate than others. The age of the greyhound when it commenced its racing career is also starting to show a high correlation to injury, with younger greyhounds starting at the earlier part of 16 months to 18 months, having a longer career and remaining injury-free for longer. Also here on this chart we can see that racing intensity plays a role, as does the level of training that the greyhound had. And we know that high racing intensity can lead to life or career-ending injuries, especially early in the dog's racing career. So the data tells us that 2 to 3% of greyhounds have a career-ending injury within its first 10 starts. And that tells us something about how we need to cater for these younger, inexperienced greyhounds. And greyhounds with more than 60 starts, which is likely an age effect, have more likelihood of injury than those with fewer starts. Additionally, some of the smaller trainers had higher injury rates than some of our larger, more professional trainers, and that we can see clearly on the comparison of injury rates between trainers, that there certainly is a training effect. So looking at this slide, it really demonstrates the effect of age on those injury rates, and you can see that the blue line of 5 to 6-year-old dogs having a bit of a spike. Now there's not many greyhounds going around that are 5 or 6 years of age, and so any injuries in that age class would result in that bit of a steep triangle. But the yellow line, the 4 to 5 years, is pretty consistent from 2014 all the way to 2022. And there you can see the highest injury rate in that class of greyhound. And this analysis is looking at injury rates in greyhounds since their last race start. And so here you can clearly see the grey line represents greyhounds that have had 21 days at least of rest, and there the highest injury rate is represented in that group. So in February 2022, GRNZ set up the Serious Injury Review Committee that reviews all serious injuries occurring during racing or trialling that incur a 42-day or more injury stand down. And we review them according to these known risk factors, but then we also look for additional risk factors in the data sets. So this allows us to review and remediate any issues that we might find in the period that we've looked at. But it also provides us an early alert to potential issues or spikes that are occurring. And the aim of this committee is to become more predictive as we start to build a predictive risk model that we can look to identify greyhounds that would be at a high risk of injury in the future. So looking at our injury prevention strategy for dealing with the greyhound fitness concerns, we've introduced some new rules at GRNZ as of the 1st of February 2023. The first one being the weight variation rule, with a 4% variation in weight either up or down, resulting in a scratching of the greyhound. We've introduced satisfactory weight trials and performance trials for greyhounds that are returning from a serious injury. We've introduced those racing frequency limits in the rules to no more than 2 starts in 7 days and no more than 7 starts in 28 days. And we're currently commenced working on a return to racing policy that would aim to provide guidelines for those greyhounds returning from 21 days or more spell. And when we think about our racing prevention or injury prevention strategy for racing incidents, we're talking about the expansion of our Preferential Box Draw Racing program in order to really eliminate the collisions that lead to those serious injuries on the turns. And what we've seen in the data so far is a reduced serious injury rate, a reduced fall rate of greyhounds, most encouraging a reduced fracture rate, which is really significant for PBD racing, and also a more even distribution of winners from the different boxes. We've also started introducing racing classes for older greyhounds over 3.5 years in the South Island, as well as racing classes for female greyhounds, which take those weight distributions of the fields into account. There's no doubt that the literature will substantiate that the track design plays an important role in injuries. And here we see some data from around Australia of the injury rates on different track designs, and you can see that by and large two-turn tracks have the worst injury rates, followed by one or single-turn tracks, and straight tracks are by far the safest in terms of serious injury and euthanasia. Another very important component of our racing safety system is how we prepare our tracks, and really using the best data that we can get to tell us about the state of a track at a particular time when it's used for trialling or racing is an essential part of the program that Greyhound Racing New Zealand is rolling out currently. And this is an example of some of the data that we might gather from a track in terms of the water moisture percentage readings, and essentially trying to establish a rating for that track that tells us about its consistency over time, and really gathering this data of our tracks and setting some guidelines for what we expect a track condition to be for our greyhounds is an important part of our race injury prevention strategy. So to recap our injury prevention strategy in terms of track design and maintenance, GRNZ is currently building a straight track in the central districts, and we look forward to that being operational in the near future. We have also undertaken several track renovations at different tracks to improve certain design and surface characteristics of those tracks to improve safety there. The North Island has seen a couple of lure upgrade projects beginning, also to improve safety with the new Safe Chase lures being installed. And we also have a racing safety track strategy. So GRNZ has purchased some going sticks which will assist us with track surface monitoring and setting those track ratings. And we have put a lot of work into setting some standards and KPIs for club curators in respect of track maintenance, as well as providing them with the necessary training, education and support to achieve those standards. So a huge focus on the track side of the equation here as part of our strategy. I'd love to answer any questions that anyone might have on any of the data, any specific problems that they may be encountering with injuries or queries they might have on particular circumstances. So please email me at welfare@grnz.co.nz. Thank you for listening.